Good morning, everyone. Very grateful for very kind invitation and introduction, and a pleasure to be here and share some views, some ideas based on my experience, the work we do at CEPS. CEPS is a think tank in Brussels, one of the oldest think tanks in Brussels, about 3 decades of doing leading research, following what the European Union is doing in a number of policy areas. And I'm certainly a nerd when it comes to migration issues. I've been working on this for about 15 years at CEPS, and it is a passion about the topic. It is a topic which brings us to the core of who we are. And the question of this forum also is central. The question of will democracy survive the global disorder? It's central because during the last 1.5 years, we've seen how the refugee question has brought us to this very dilemma of can democracy and the rule of law stand when responding to challenges such as the ones we've seen during the last times. And I have a presentation for you, a PowerPoint, where I will basically highlight some issues for consideration, hopefully will be followed up as well during the different discussion panels that will take place on issues of migration. One of the things which has been worrying about the responses to the so-called refugee crisis is how little it has been based on research. Sonia was mentioning the role of social sciences, and I truly believe, I have my heart there too, that social sciences are absolutely fundamental to inform policy making. Unfortunately, during the last 1.5 years, very little of the decisions that have been taken have been based on facts, and instead much fear, irrationality has predominated both in Brussels as well as in several capitals across Europe. Now, in my presentation today, I will start with facts. What do the numbers tell us about where we are with this so-called, or even miscalled, refugee crisis? What is the situation at the moment? Then I will move to what have been the policy responses by the European Union in light of those facts. And I will address some critical comments to the role that Brussels and some European institutions have played so far. And lastly, I will bring to you a concept which I think help us to understand what has happened when looking at the policies which have been developed and implemented, and that is crisis-led policy making. Very much encapsulating, I will argue in this presentation, what has happened in terms of public policy responses. Now, the facts. Well, I don't know if you can see the PowerPoint. I will perhaps move a little bit. I don't know. I'm not sure what is better. Number of entries. The number of entries have decreased dramatically. It's true. You've seen it in the media, in the press. So, numbers. You've seen in the media, the numbers have decreased dramatically. Only this year, we have actually very few number of entries through Greece, about 150,000 people, which in comparison to the previous year is a dramatic decrease. We have about 200 people entering every day by sea in Greece. And a very important fact, there are about 13,000 people caught in Greece. 13,000 asylum seekers that can go nowhere in Greece. Here you have data by UNHCR illustrating what I'm saying. If you compare number of entries in 2016 in January in Greece, there were about 67,000 people, and after the EU-Turkey deal, that I will come back to that in a minute, especially after March, in April you see a major decrease from 26,000 people to 3,000, and then in June, 1,000 people entering. So in terms of numbers, the so-called crisis, when it comes to Greece, the eastern route, one could say, and it has been argued by several instances in Brussels, that there is no more crisis. In Italy, however, the numbers have remained very stable. There haven't been major changes there. It is about 160,000 as well entries by sea in Italy. 40,000 people have been rescued at sea so far in Italy, according to Frontex statistics. The second question, which is central here, there's been a lot of confusion of who are we talking about? Who are those people? Well, if you look at the nationalities, the top 5 countries from where people come from are, of course, as you know, Syria, followed by Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, Iraq. It happens that those 5 countries are recognized by the United Nations as key sources of refugees. These are asylum seekers. There's been a lot of confusion reframing those people as irregular migrants, and even some rather unfortunate framing of even illegal migrants, when it's not true. These people are truly, according to UNHCR, asylum seekers, and this is confirmed by Eurostat. If you look at Eurostat statistics, the recognition rates as refugees in Europe of these nationals are extremely high. They are extremely high. You see the data is available for 2015. Numbers have decreased. Italy remains stable. However, deaths at sea have increased. People dying in the Mediterranean when trying to enter Europe have increased, according to IOM. They have a project really monitoring what is going on there. And reportedly, this is the number of people that we know are missing or dying when trying to get their way to Europe. Last point on data and figures. According to Eurostat, interestingly, the number of first asylum applications have remained the same as previous year in total in Europe. So far this year, we have 800,000 first asylum applications. If we continue like this, it will be similar to 2015, just for you to know. Now, so just a few figures for those who like statistics. What have been the EU responses? One of the key solutions, key responses to by the European Union to respond to these entries of people through Greece and Italy has been cooperation with third countries. This has been one of the key ways to go about it. And I was mentioning before this concept of crisis-led policymaking as a way to understand which kind of cooperation is taking place. We are seeing the proliferation of flexible, informal, non-legally binding instruments being adopted very fast, in very fast ways, in the name of crisis, emergency-led, which are posing fundamental questions to democracy and the rule of law. The EU also concept of rule of law as laid down in the treaties. No proper consideration, no proper questioning and debate, and very profound consequences when it comes to checks and balances, lack of checks and balances, and fundamental rights of people involved. What have been the priorities in this cooperation with third countries? Well, first, and this has been very clear, very transparent message by European institutions in Brussels, prevent entry so that those people don't reach Europe. Second, expulsion, so that those who arrive are expelled as fast as possible and that they are readmitted to those countries. Third, keep those people where they are. I was mentioning before Greece. They are caught in transit, or in Turkey, or in Greece. We know very little what is going on with those people in Turkey, apart from information delivered by NGOs and civil society, the few who may have access to information now there. And there is this reframing of people as irregular migrants, as illegal migrants, this kind of criminality framing, which of course justifies why this priority of expulsion and policing, which have very much predominated across the different responses: border controls, policing, expelling people, returning people, and putting a lot of pressure and coercion on people. A lot of pressure and coercion on people. This has come along with, oh, some of those countries are safe, so we can send those people back too. So yes, we've got a decrease in the number of entries in the Turkey-Greek route, but at what cost? At what cost? The European Commission said the decrease in numbers shows that we've been successful, but at what cost for democracy? At what cost for rule of law? I argue this morning that the costs have been profoundly major, politically, ethically, and democratically. This doesn't take into account the political instability that in countries like Turkey we've witnessed. Is the EU creating incapacity in those countries? Is the priority given to migration containment, to containing refugees in those countries, actually increasing incapacity for those same countries to comply with human rights, to comply with their own democratic and rule of law standards and principles? Turkey is a paradigmatic example. We saw the decrease in numbers after March, the moment when the so-called deal was concluded. And you may wonder, what is a statement? It's called EUTurkey Statement. I was mentioning before, as one of the features of crisis-led policymaking, the use of flexible, non-legally binding instruments. What is a statement? This has a profound consequence because a statement is not an international agreement, meaning you don't have the European Parliament involved. The European Parliament doesn't need to give a consent to the agreement. You don't have judicial control because it's not law, it's a statement, it's a political declaration. And this poses, again, very fundamental problem. What is it? If people's rights are violated as a consequence of this statement, what are the mechanisms to seek redress, to seek effective remedies? There are a couple of cases now pending before the Luxembourg court where 3 asylum seekers have brought the case to the court saying, please, annul this statement. We are caught in between here. We are in the risk of being returned to Turkey, and therefore we are really risking our safety. And those 2 pending cases, let's see what the court says, but illustrate the problem that yes, it's a political declaration, but it has very deep consequences for people on the ground, and very clear legal effects too for people on the ground. Is Turkey safe? There's been a lot of debate about that. Can we really say that Turkey is safe, especially after the failed coup d'etat? Can someone rationally really argue that? Well, the European Commission seems to think yes. The Greek authorities were actually very hesitant to consider Turkey as a safe third country and asked Brussels to write down the guarantees. And actually there was a letter by Matthias Rutte, the Director General of DG Home Affairs in the Commission, saying yes, the Commission thinks Greece is safe. But that letter has no legal value. It's a political. Whatever comes from the Commission saying that Turkey is a safe third country is a political framing. A court may completely, fundamentally disagree with that. But still, the EU-Turkey statement was based on this myth that Turkey is safe for Syrians, for Afghans, from people coming from Afghanistan. How can we really think that? I cannot really tell you. This has come with a lot of pressures on Greece, a lot of pressures on Greece to do the job. that has been told to do, which has in turn increased incapacity of Greece to deal with the issue. One of the key questions behind this is the so-called Dublin system. I'm sure you've heard in the media about this Dublin system of distribution of asylum seekers. This system attributes a fundamentally unfair sharing of responsibilities between member states at times of assessing asylum applications. First entry country responsible for assessing the application. And the asylum seeker is coerced to stay in that member state. The EU-Turkey deal increases the incapacity of Greece to deal with the challenge by its own. We've seen it's very well documented by civil society, which, by the way, have played a fundamental role and very important role to deliver humanitarian assistance during this period, how people are detained in Greece under horrible conditions. There is not a functioning asylum system in Greece. And on those bases, how can we think of cooperation with Turkey from this perspective of sending people back to Turkey if there is not a function even in Greece? Not to speak of Turkey, but you don't need to go as far as Turkey. There have been a lot of discussions too on readmission and visa. And this is part of it's been part of a lot of political discussions. Turkish authorities have been used this as leverage with the EU to get visa liberalization, which, as you know, is still pending. What I mean here is that the EU-Turkey deal statement is very much dependent on the state of diplomatic relations, too, between the EU and Turkey, which makes the whole deal very vulnerable, highly vulnerable. So I wouldn't be so positive as the Commission is that this is a successful way to deal with the issue. When it comes to the Western Balkans, we've seen more of the same. There was another statement at the end of 2015. This has basically meant closing the Balkan routes so that people cannot leave Greece. And people have been sent back to Greece on very dubious and dodgy ways. And we know that from UNHCR and civil society on the basis of nationality, which contravenes international conventions, not least the Geneva Convention. The fact that those people are asylum seekers means that they are entitled to an individual application, an individual assessment of their claim. That's the fundamental difference when talking about who are those people. Are they asylum seekers? Are they irregular migrants? The statistics show they are asylum seekers, therefore, they are entitled to an individual asylum assessment. And this is not happening. This has not happened. This is not happening. And this is very problematic. What happens with Africa? There was a summit in Valletta, in Malta, in November the past year. The focus being expulsion, return. The focus being, or the intention by the EU being, trying to persuade African countries to readmit their own nationals. This has been a very controversial issue. African countries don't want to cooperate with the EU on readmission. And the EU's way to go about this has been to condition, even to suggest conditioning development cooperation to them readmitting their own nationals. It hasn't worked. It hasn't worked for 15 years. And the Valletta summit proved again that this is the wrong way to go about it. It didn't work either. The Commission came with a communication on the so-called partnerships, frameworks, the compacts. Now everything is a compact. It's like compact. What is a compact? Well, from my perspective, a compact is compacting everything into what the EU thinks those countries should do, which is return and readmission. And we put a nice lace on it, and we call it compact, but it's the same. And of course, it has very little chances of success. For countries which have still very close memories of colonialism And actually, working with the EU in those issues has very important repercussions at home. It's not very popular at home. And it has also repercussions, geopolitical repercussions, in their relations with their neighbors. And of course, the EU does not take into account, or the EU instances are not properly taking into account this. Instruments. I was saying the crisis-led policymaking. You see the proliferation also of flexible, non-legally binding instruments developed with these countries. So instead of going for an EU readmission agreement, the EU is concluding so-called joint declarations with those countries. What is a joint declaration? I raise the question, as you may have an answer. It's a political, again, it's a political instrument, non-legally binding, aiming at facilitating return of people to those countries under very little guarantees. There is being a joint declaration with Ghana being concluded. There is being a similar instrument with Nigeria being concluded. And again, this is, the European Parliament is not involved in the conclusion of those instruments. If something goes wrong, legally, there are no effective ways to challenge or to have redress by individuals. Where is this leaving us? This kind of approach to Africa. One of my favorite cases is Afghanistan and Pakistan. So if you didn't have enough, wait and see. There's been a so-called joint way forward concluded with Afghanistan very recently. Again, what is a joint way forward? The US is kind of reinventing every day, how do they call the instruments they adopt to conclude dodgy deals with countries like Afghanistan, deals covering questions of expulsion again of Afghanis to that country. How can we think of Afghanistan as a safe country of origin? Is Afghanistan safe? I mean, it's just a rhetorical question. Of course, it's not safe. Evidence tells us very clearly it's not safe. Still, there's been a joint way forward concluded in Brussels for sending back nationals to that country. And the External Action Service is rubber stamping this joint way forward, which is surprising. I will mention that in a minute, for an actor which is supposed to, a European actor which is supposed to deal with not only home affairs, interior ministry, policing approach, but wider foreign affairs issues like human rights. What about human rights in those countries? What about conflict in those countries? So there we see a similar trend on let's send people back. Let's send people and frame those countries as safe when they are clearly not. Pakistan, we've done in-depth research on the situation of Pakistan. There is actually an EU readmission agreement with Pakistan for some years, but during the so-called crisis, refugee crisis, there were a couple of cases leading to controversy. A Frontex operation from Greece trying to send 50 people back to Pakistan, and Pakistan saying, thank you very much, but those people are not our nationals. So there are still unresolved issues as to how cooperation with those countries work. Very briefly, institutionally, we have the Juncker Commission, the new External Action Service. In our previous research at CEPS, we had assessed the role of the previous commission on this, and we came to the conclusion how surprising at EU level you have interior actors, home affairs actors going abroad to negotiate with those countries. And we concluded perhaps this is justifying the predominance, the priority given to return, to readmission, to policing. And we said the External Action Service should take over, because like this we should have, or we will have, a more balanced approach to those countries where other policy areas are also considered. Well, more recent research we've been doing, unfortunately, do not confirm that. The External Action Service has now a more active role, but they are now behaving as the police. We were calling before DG Home Affairs of the Commission saying the policemen acting like diplomats or pretending to act as diplomats. But now what we are seeing is the External Action Service, so diplomats, acting like policemen, going to those countries like Afghanistan and saying, readmission and return is the key priority. Take it or leave it. And this is very unfortunate development. It's still a very much Home Affairs-driven agenda. And again, the External Action Service, the checks and balances of the External Action Service are very limited. There is no European Parliament involved. What about democracy? So to conclude, all this leads me back very briefly to the crisis-led policy making. It's fine, thank you. To the crisis-led policy making. We have emergency responses, ways of doing policy, which pose fundamental questions to rule of law and democracy. It is, I think, of absolute importance for the European Union to stand by its founding principles in the treaties, that it is very clear that this is non-negotiable, because in this name of populism, the EU is actually feeding the monster by buying into these discourses of we need to expel people, we need to criminalize people, those people are irregular migrants. This is precisely the discourse of the extreme right. What is the difference? What is the difference? If the EU, all relevant institutions, highest level, External Action Service, European Commission, don't take extremely seriously the rule of law guarantees provided in the treaties as a way to respond, especially in times of crisis, this will lead to a legitimacy crisis for the European Union. Beyond humanitarian crisis, political legitimacy crisis. All the political parties which are criticizing the European Union because it's not legitimate, I think that unfortunately, when looking at what has happened during the last 1.5 years, when it comes to refugees, feeds, I think, the monster. And I still hope that a different response is possible. It is absolutely possible and feasible. There are many practical ways to deal with it. But it's just a question of political will. Thank you very much.